Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is Astral Visit to Ancient Mars. This is a good one. Before we get into it, just want to mention a few things. If you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, you can certainly do so. When you join us on Patreon, you get advanced episodes, commercial-free on Sunday, a library of downloaded episodes for your podcast app, and a Patreon email where we can talk back and forth, and you can ask questions and share your experiences with me, and I check that on a daily basis. Next up, private lessons. If you'd like a lesson to learn how to astral project, be more than glad to work with you. All you have to do is go into the description, where you'll find the Patreon link, by the way. Just go into the description and you'll find an email there where you can ask for information on private lessons. Okay, let's get started. You know, I always read and consider every comment, every question that's left for me on Astral Club. I mean, I always feel that since you took the time to leave the comment or the question, I should do my best to answer it if I can. Or the comment, read it and absorb the information. So a couple weeks ago, there was a couple different comments. One was actually a question, and I was asked, did I ever build things in the astral? I never really have. I know I've seen plenty of other artificial constructions in the astral that are thought forms that somebody put a lot of time and energy into. But that just doesn't really interest me. I'm an explorer. I want to explore. I don't want to create some fantasy castle for myself. That doesn't really appeal to me at all. I want to explore the various times, space, dimensions. That's what interests me. Then I checked out another comment where the individual said that I should check out Mars. Now, I've checked out Mars before. It's fun when you first get there and you realize you're flying over Mars. But present-day Mars, I don't find that interesting. See, what I find interesting typically is, life. If there's life somewhere, that's what makes things really interesting. But, Mars as a planet right now, today, is not that interesting. Not for some astral spirit like myself, who's looking for something that is extremely compelling and something that I can feel excited about. And after you've flown over Mars for a while, it gets kind of old. I guess I've never flown over the Sahara Desert, but I can imagine that when you first start flying over the Sahara, you're probably looking out the window, thinking how cool it is that you're flying over this huge, magnificent desert. But after you've done it for hours and hours, I imagine it probably gets pretty boring. And that's how I feel when I visited Mars. And I did so on a number of occasions. But then I came up with the idea, why not visit Mars billions of years ago, back when there may have been water on the surface, who knows, maybe even some sort of life, something that makes it more fascinating. It makes for a better experience and a better podcast here. So with that in mind, I did, a little bit of research on Mars. Now, as someone who's been an amateur astronomer as a kid, of course, I knew quite a bit about Mars, and a lot's been discovered because we've had a lot of spacecraft land on there, and we have the rovers. And what we do know about Mars, and this is just really briefly, is that, it's the fourth planet from the sun. It's the second smallest of the planets. Mercury is the smallest. And with a radius of 3,390 kilometers or 2,100 miles. It's quite a small planet. For comparison's sake, the Earth is 6,371 kilometers, or 3,959 miles. So Mars is quite a bit smaller than the Earth. They started out probably somewhat similar in their development, but then things changed quite rapidly. About 4.5 billion years ago, scientists tell us that our solar system was created. And the Earth, about 4.5 billion years ago, was smaller than it is today. It was molten, and it went through its own period of development. It was slammed into by some planet they call Theia, and it created the moon. It made the Earth much bigger, and just may have created the conditions that would one day become life based on how much larger the Earth became. Because Mars being so small, it lost its magnetosphere very early on in its development. Now, the magnetosphere, and I hate to get into all the sciencey stuff, but it's important that everybody's on the same page here. The magnetosphere is what protects planets like the Earth from solar radiation, solar storms, coronal mass ejections. All these things are very harmful. But if you have this magnetosphere, think of it like a Star Trek field, a shield that largely protects the Earth. If you've ever seen the Aurora Borealis, that is the solar winds attacking the Earth. And our magnetosphere is fighting off that radiation. And as a result, you get these wild colors that form the Aurora Borealis. We also have a big moon in the sky, which has gone a long way to stabilizing the axis of the Earth to such an extent that it doesn't go through huge, wild swings like a smaller planet like Mars does, because it doesn't have a large moon. But let's get away from the Earth. I mean, Mars, they think, had oceans. But because it lost the magnetosphere, over millions and millions of years, the solar storms took a toll on Mars, and it lost its atmosphere eventually. And when it lost its atmosphere, of course, temperatures plummeted. The water in the planet, a lot of it was lost to space. We know some of it went into the soil because we've done some surveys that indicate that there's a substantial amount of water in the soil, especially near the northern area of Mars. Okay, with all the science out of the way, let's get into my trip. I left my body, and I had done some homework ahead of time. I knew where Mars was by checking some astronomical charts. Of course, it's not exactly hard either. You look in the sky and you look for that reddish-looking star, and that's Mars. So it was pretty easy to home in on it. And as I flew towards Mars, I launched myself by using every bit of my will into projecting into the past. And remember, when one travels in time in the astral, I like going into the future normally, because when you go into the future in many of those trips and the dimensions that you find yourself in, you can spend, hours, days, weeks, months, and in some cases years in these distant futures. However, as you go into the past, it's very much different. Minutes are what you get to spend there now. And even then, you have to use quite a bit of will to stay there. Whereas going into the future, it's also great too, because you have power. You can actually interact with other beings and physical objects the further you go into the future. Unfortunately, as you go into the past, you're nothing but a ghost, and you can't affect anything. All you can do is, see what's going on. So I felt myself falling into this deep hole. And as I said, I was projecting using every bit of my will. And I was projecting not to a time necessarily, but with the thought of going back to when Mars had water. And there is a slight danger there that you end up in some fantasy world, but I know enough to tell the difference. So I wasn't afraid of that, whereas a new person runs that risk. But I wasn't afraid of that. And I thought that would be more accurate than trying to aim at billions of years, because trying to even understand that or even conceptualize that length of time, it's pretty crazy. The human mind is incapable of understanding. We use the word billions, or some people say million, but you don't really understand it. And I thought I'd be better off going for a particular type of a particular version of Mars, assuming that it did have water at some point in time in its past, as many scientists think today. So I blacked out, and it felt like I was out for a long time, but it's impossible to know for sure. When I regained consciousness, I was floating in orbit around Mars, but it didn't look like Mars. What it looked like was a planet with water. In the northern polar regions, there was this enormous blot of blue that I saw as I was hovering above. And I also saw that there were some large rivers streaming on the planet as well. Your vision can be very sharp when you focus it in the astral, because essentially your will is causing the focus. All you have to do is will yourself to be able to see the detail you want to see if you're controlling the experience properly. So I was extremely elated. Here's a wet Mars. Now, the rest of the land still looked kind of brownish red, but it was more brownish than it was red. At any rate, I dived in because, let's face it, this is interesting. I find this interesting. Perhaps I could find life. Who knows? I dove right into the Mars ocean. I wasn't afraid because, first of all, I figured that the chances that I would find any kind of life that would scare me is basically nil, because scientists believe that even if there was water on Mars, it couldn't have been there long enough to really generate anything scary. Maybe microscopic stuff, but that would be about it. At any rate, I dove in at an enormous speed, and I sunk very quickly. There was a flash of light as I saw the blue water, and then I sunk right into the darkness. I started thinking to myself, oh yeah, that's right. Since the sun is so much further away from Mars than it is from Earth, that the water probably got dark even much quicker than it did, or than it does on Earth. Now, the darkness in water still freaks me out a little bit, so I decided to rise to further up into the Martian Ocean, which I did pretty quickly. Got out of that abyssal plane, whatever. And so as I rose, I was overjoyed because here I am. Now there was light. There was a blue ocean, although it had some greenish tints to it as well. I started flying through the water. Maybe I was, 50 feet down, let's say maybe, 12 meters or so. I don't know what exactly that translates to. Probably somewhere close to that. Maybe actually it's more like 14 meters. At any rate, I was down to a level where it was very, it was light. I could see. And so I buzzed through the water very quickly, just having fun. Then I slowed down, looking for, anything of interest. As I, buzzed along through the water, I didn't perceive any particular life. I didn't sense anything either. Although, if there was some sort of single cell life, I doubt I'd be able to sense it anyway, because I can sense animal awareness, but, animals are much more advanced, billions of years more advanced than a single cell organism would be. And we have to remember that on Earth, for an enormous period of time, there was only single cell life. Life didn't really get interesting to fairly late in the development of the Earth. So I was disappointed, but I wasn't exactly surprised that this Martian ocean didn't have, any sea monsters or anything cool. I did read when I got back that they think that Mars did have an ocean somewhere around, 4 billion years or so. And at one point, they think early on that Mars was covered in an ocean. But when I got there, there was land, and then there was this northern ocean. So it was probably later on in Mars' development. In the land, because I left the water after a while because it just wasn't getting me anywhere, and I was already fighting the signal to return back to the present. So I couldn't waste time. So I went ahead and I ended up flying over the land, which, was fun, but there was no life that I could see, which I guess didn't surprise me, because if I was on Earth right now, it wouldn't look anywhere near as nice as this, I thought to myself, because the Earth was in an earlier stage of its development. Mars cooled faster because it was further away from the sun and because it was smaller. So it was able to support the water. Now, the water was brought, they believe, to Mars in comet bombardment. There was something called the Late Heavy Bombardment that hit Earth somewhere around 3.8 billion years ago or so. And they figured all the planets got hit, including Mars. And I did see that there were crater impacts on Mars at that point. However, I didn't see any. I didn't see any moons, and I certainly didn't see Phobos or Deimos, which are the two present moons of Mars. Although, if you've ever studied Mars, don't think Earth moon. Okay, these things are really rocks, really with an attitude. That's about it. So don't get too crazy. They're too small, for instance, to control or to help control the axis of Mars, which means that every million years or 3 million years or so, Mars goes through an enormous axial tilt, which, if there was life on it, would probably wipe it out. The Earth would be going through that nonsense too, if it wasn't for that big old beautiful moon that is hovering above the Earth at all times, locked in this celestial dance with Earth, and it keeps us steady. It's if the Earth might be a tipsy your tipsy mate, then the moon, Earth's moon, is like the more responsible mate, making sure that nobody drives and gets in trouble. So I continued to explore Mars. Then I decided to make another time jump, just to see if I could find anything else interesting. So I decided to project myself some millions of years into the future from the standpoint of where I was. Let's say I was somewhere around 4 billion. I don't know. When I regained consciousness, though, I saw that the ocean was smaller than it had been before. There were ice caps on Mars, on the North and the South Pole. They weren't huge, but they were definitely there. As I said, the ocean it was definitely smaller than what I had seen before. But what was really interesting is that Mars had a ring. I never knew that Mars had a ring. And so I went into space to explore it. And true enough, I mean, it wasn't as fantastic as Saturn's rings are. I mean, I love chilling on Saturn's rings. I've mentioned that before. But there was a definite rocky ring around Mars, which tells me that at some point, Mars must have been hit by a pretty sizable object, maybe a planetoid, something like that, much like the Earth had been hit to create, hit by Theia. That other planet had hit by Theia, knocking all that rubble into space, because you need to be pretty large and have a pretty good sized impact in order to propel a substantial amount of material into orbit. So if that's what happened on Earth, I'm assuming that that's what happened on Mars as well. There were certainly many more craters than I had seen before, and some very large ones as well. And one of the good things about Mars is, unlike the Earth, there's no tectonic plate movement. So things don't disappear. It's a lot like the moon. Now, the moon is completely geologically, we believe, dead. So there's really nothing that's changing there other than some dust that settles, over the centuries. Mars, on the other hand, does have, it's still geologically active. There's still volcanoes on there that are active. They still have earthquakes. Although, as I said, that interior molten core, which the Earth has, which allows us to have that magnetosphere that protects us, Mars lost that a long time ago because they believe that it became solid. So evidently, here's Mars. It must have been hit by something big, knocked all this rubble. It's got a ring around it, and the ocean obviously was being evaporated. It was going into space. It was, their atmosphere was being lost. I dove back down into Mars again, and the sky was still blue as it had been in my first visit there before I advanced again. But I started seeing some differences in how blue it was, and I think there was some definite loss of atmosphere that was occurring. It's always nice to be in your astral body because you don't really care about atmosphere, and that's a heck of a nice thing. If astronauts ever end up going to Mars, they got to worry about not dying there. And just like in space, there's a million ways to die on Mars. If you want to think about Mars the way it is right now, it's kind of like Antarctica, but without the good stuff. It's cold like Antarctica. There's ice there. It's pretty barren. There's not a lot of life. Well, there's no life that I saw on Mars, but not a lot of life hanging on the land with Antarctica either. But Antarctica's got something that Mars doesn't, and that is a breathable atmosphere. And that's something that you can't discount. That's really nice to have. But at any rate, that's what I was looking at Mars. So I decided I was being pulled back again, but I was fighting. I said, let's make one last planetary survey on this time zone, and then I'll probably end up getting pulled back. So I went up into space and I started circling around what would be basically the equator of Mars, just making one last survey. When I felt this weird pull, this weird electromagnetic pull, and I looked down and I saw something glint in the sun. So I dove down. I wanted to see what it was. And boy, was I surprised to see this silvery antenna, perhaps. It looked like one of those Egyptian pylons that they have, except that it wasn't made from stone. It was obviously some sort of silvery metal. My guess was something like titanium. And imagine an Egyptian pylon, but this thing was thicker at the bottom, and it sloped up into a pylon type object with a pyramid point at the very top. I estimated it at 100 feet or about 30 meters. It was smooth. It was blackish at the top, like it was some sort of an obsidian rock, but it wasn't rock. It was definitely metal. And I could feel electromagnetism just boiling off this thing. There was these enormous waves, enormous electromagnetic waves that were coming off this thing. To say that I was shocked and surprised is an underestimate of the emotions that I was going through. I looked for any kind of writing. I didn't see any writing. I wondered if that black piece at the top was perhaps absorbing energy from the sun. Was it solar? I don't know. What was the power source? Whatever it was emitting an enormous amount of electromagnetic energy, such that I was fighting, once I got close to it, I was fighting to get pulled in. And luckily, I've gained a lot of knowledge over the years, and I've been able to sharpen my technique to avoid getting pulled to something like this, like a iron shaving is pulled to a very powerful earth magnet. And I was able to stop myself from becoming attached to it. But I was able to see when I landed some yards or meters away from this device that it was definitely pulsing with energy. What its purpose was, I don't know. Was it some sort of energy production device? Was it monitoring Mars? Was it sending out signals? It was sending out pulses of something, but I just had no clue. I decided to go back up into the atmosphere again and cruise around. And what I proceeded to find was a series of these exact same, I don't know what you want to call them, pylon antennas, alien devices that were surrounding the equator of Mars. I think I saw about a total of 12 of them. And what their purpose was, I don't know. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that they were created by something on Mars, because I didn't see any evidence of any type of Martian civilization. I mean, who knows? Maybe there was single cellular life, but that's not creating these things. So did some sort of aliens visit our solar system billions of years ago? Did they implant these pylons for some exploratory reason? Who knows? It certainly is a very compelling observation. It certainly posed a lot more questions in my mind than I had any kind of answers for. Are they still there to this day? Now, they certainly wouldn't be visible anymore. Mars doesn't have the tectonic plates that Earth does, but, 4 billion years takes a toll on every darn thing. And, Mars still deposits dust, so I can only imagine just how, if they're still there, if they're buried under whoever knows how much soil dust caused by a variety of dust storms over the, millennia. But it would be interesting if one day we actually visit there and dig these things up. That would certainly be extremely interesting. Unfortunately, my time was up. There was no more time to ask questions, no more time to observe. I couldn't hold myself there any longer, and I was pulled quite violently back to present time and awoke in my bed, where I proceeded to jot down all kinds of notes that I can barely read. So that was the experience. I visited ancient Mars. I saw a number of things, right? I saw that Mars had water, had an ocean at one point. So it had an atmosphere. And I saw how that had a ring of rubble around it at one point. And, oh yeah, by the way, it had alien devices on it as well. So that was certainly worth the price of admission. Well, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds, subscribe if you haven't already. And questions and comments and suggestions, I love that stuff, and it may pop up in a future episode. And as always, this is Rick, and I'll see you on the astral plane.